A story I recently heard, and it's unknown. You'll understand in a moment why it's unknown. I never heard it before, and I guess I couldn't have heard it before because by definition it's an unknown story. I'll explain what I mean in a moment. I have a friend. We learned in yeshiva together. His name is Rabbi Y.Y. He is the rabbi of the Central Synagogue in Sydney, Australia. I think that's the largest shul in that entire hemisphere. Very good. I think it has a good few thousand seats, 3,000-4,000 seats, which fill up probably Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. But even a regular Shabbos, it's a huge, huge shul, very prominent, very dignified. And Rabbi Wolf Levi is the rabbi of Central Synagogue in Sydney. Okay? You gotta go with the music. You gotta dance to the beat, man. You can't ignore the music. So he sends me an email. Does email work with the music? Okay, you never knew that an email could be so dramatic. So my dear friend, my childhood friend, Levi Yitzchak, sends me an email a little while ago, and he says that Shabbos, he had a guest in Sydney. A guest from the land of Israel, from Eretz Yisrael. The president of the Academic College of Tel Aviv. Whatever that means to you. His name is Reb Shloime. Reb Shloime is the president of the Academic College of Tel Aviv Yafo, it's called. So he comes Shabbos to Rabbi Wolf, and they're eating the Shabbos meal. The middle of the meal, Reb Shloime says, I want to tell you a story. And this is the story, listen to this. There was a young Hungarian Jewish boy who grew up in the city known as Szeged. Am I pronouncing it correctly? Some of you know it as Sigit, but you know how it's spelled? S-Z, right? E-G-E-D, I believe. Emes? So those who don't know Sigit, Nebach, pronounce it in other ways. Anyway, this boy grew up in Sigit, which, as you know, was a home to a very large, powerful, and vibrant Jewish community. And he grew up in a home of Torah, in a home of Yerushalayim, in a home of Yiddishkeit. He learned and then came 1944 and the invasion of Hungary by Nazi Germany transpired, and the Hungarian Jewry came to a brutal, brutal end. He and his family were uprooted. They were sent to the death camps. And most of his family perished in the fires of the Holocaust. He managed to survive. This young man managed to survive physically, but he bid farewell to his entire past. It's not that he left Judaism and became a secular Jew. This was something that happened to many of the survivors. But he was filled with bitterness and anger towards God, towards Torah, towards Yiddishkeit. And he went on to study. He became a very successful and prominent professor. First in Australia, then in Israel. And much of his life he dedicated to demonstrate the futility, the absurdity of Judaism, of the Jewish religion, of the Jewish God, of the Jewish faith. He was filled with animosity to Yiddishkeit. He became a philosophy professor, and he even authored a book about Judaism, where he explained that by definition, Judaism is a horrible theocracy, which basically believes in the oppression of human rights and individual rights and human liberty and individualism and freedom and all the values that we cherish and we hold dear. And Judaism fights them and craves for the person to go back to the Dark Ages. His book was published in Hebrew. His book was translated into English. It sold pretty well, in which he set out his belief about the religion that he practiced in his youth, his parents practiced, but he has completely abandoned and rebelled against. Now, he was a shtickle Talmud Chacham, which of course makes things always more complicated and more juicy. Right? They say he wasn't an ignorant. There's an old expression from knacken semichkas, vetmenish kanapikairis, from, how do you say knacken semichkas? That's not how you say it in English. Garinim sagt mir. For knacken semichkas means from cracking sunflower seeds all day in the schwitz. You don't become a heretic, right? To become a heretic, the music stopped suddenly. Reb Nachman says that everything in the world has a niggin, even Apicursus has a niggin. It's just Reb Nachman says you're singing the wrong niggin. That's what he says in Lekutei Maran. Kol davar yesh lo niggin, even a heresy, you're singing the wrong niggin. Reb Moshe Leib Sosova says, Me'inyan le'inyan, he says, everything has a source in Kedusha, everything has a source in holiness. Everything comes from Hashem. So he says, what's the source of Apicursus in Kedusha? What's the source of heresy and holiness? So he says that there's something very holy in it. Why? He says, when you see somebody in trouble, you see somebody suffering, and they need help, he says, you might tell yourself, you know, so the große Gott of the Welt, there's a big God in the world, he's going to help you. You say, have a wonderful day, Hashem will help you. He says, this is where Hashem wants. You should have a little nitzutz of Apicursus. You should have a little spark and say, you know what? The buck stops here. I gotta do whatever I can. Hashem runs the world. Hashem knows what he's doing. But now is your turn to shine, to stand up for this person. Gewaldige Wort. Okay, anyway, so this man was a shtickle Talmud Chacham in Sigid. He learned very well. And he knew the text and he knew the sources. So his book wasn't just a book written by somebody, you know, who never doesn't know how to read the Chumash right to left, left to right, doesn't know how to look in a Rashi, a Tosfos, a Rashba, a Marsha, a Rebbe Akiva Eiger, a Bir Hagra. He knew his stuff, which made the book far more venomous because he knew what sources to quote in order to demonstrate his perspective on how horrible Kavayachal Yiddishkeit is. Shloime continues telling Rabbi Wolf, my friend, he says, the professor got older, and one day he fell ill. He was diagnosed with Yenemachela, with cancer. He says, I and a few of my colleagues, who were all in the academic world in Israel, went to visit this professor. He was already quite ill. He was in his house, in his bedroom. We went into him, we were just schmoozing and talking. So at some point, this professor pulled me aside, pulled Reb Shloime aside. He says, come into my library with me. He had in his house a library, a private study with hundreds, thousands of books. He was an academic, he was an intellectual. I go into the library and he tells me, a few years ago, when I was a little younger, I wrote a letter to New York. I wrote a letter to the Lubavitcher Rebbe. The letter was very, very sharp-tongued. It was mean. It was vicious. It was very confrontational. And it was extremely critical. I basically knew the Lubavitcher Rebbe is also an intellectual. And I basically penned on paper all of my harsh arguments against God, against Torah, against Yiddishkeit. And I was extremely, extremely critical of the Rebbe's positions and his belief and what he's trying to accomplish in the world, to spread Yiddishkeit and so forth. He said, I didn't think he's going to answer me. The truth is that the letter didn't deserve an answer. It was so harsh. It was so disrespectful. It was so argumentative. It was so confrontational. I didn't think the rabbi would answer me. He's telling Reb Shlomo. But a few weeks later, I receive a letter. And the letter was written in the Lubavitcher Rebbe's own handwriting. Now everybody knows that was unique. Lubavitcher Rebbe used to dictate his letters to his secretaries. And they would type it up. And he would edit it, correct it, and they would retype it, and he would sign it, and they would send it out, they would mail it. It was very, very rare that he should write a letter in his own handwriting. But he said, I received a letter back from the Lubavitcher Rebbe, from Rabbi Schneerson, in his own handwriting. And then the old professor goes over to a certain shelf in his library. He takes out the book. He opens the book, and I see in one of the pages, there's a piece of paper handwritten on it. And I take a look, I see it's a letter, and it's signed Menachem Mendel Schneerson. This was the original letter in the Rebbe's handwriting that he sent back to the professor. The old man, the professor, says, read the letter. Read the letter. So Reb Shlomo is telling this to Rabbi Wolf, who told it to me just a few weeks ago. He said, I read the letter. He said, I can't tell you the exact words verbatim. It was a few years ago. But the structure and the content of the letter, I clearly remember. He said, the Rebbe opened up the letter first thanking the professor for writing to him. The first thing, he expressed gratitude that he took the time to share his thoughts, his feelings, his life experiences, and his perspectives with the Rebbe. He said the Rebbe wrote to him in a plural form, in a Lashon Rabbim, a Lashon Kavod. Not in English, everything is you. But in Hebrew, we know there's a distinction. Just like in Yiddish, there's du and there's ir. In Hebrew, there's also the way of speaking in a respectful way. That's how he addressed him. And then the Rebbe writes to him, allow me permission to inquire something I'm wondering about. I read your letter and I read your name. I saw your first name, I saw your last name. And I'm wondering, and I wish you can help me clarify your origin. Basically, the surname, the last name, your family name, doesn't it indicate that you come from this and this Litvischer Jewish family? There was a famous Litvischer family, and the Rebbe is very specific about the city. Does this name and this first name and last name indicate that you are a descendant of that family? Or perhaps this name was also shared by one more family of Vishnitzer Chassidim. Is it based on the fact that you come from Sighet that you belong to this special great family of Vishnitz? That's what I would like to know. And he said, then the Rebbe finished off with a blessing and thanks, a very warm bracha, and he signed his name. I finished reading the letter, and the professor looks at me and his hands are trembling, and he says, these were his words, this was his question. Do you get what he did to me? Do you understand how he reproached me? Do you appreciate how he gave me Mussar? He didn't mention a word about my arguments, my insults, my heresy, my attacking him, my criticizing him, my denigrating him. Not a word. But do you hear what type of profound Mussar he gave me and how he approached me? He says, with these subtle questions about the meaning of what my name represents, he was basically reminding me that you come from a glorious past. You come from an incredible Jewish family. The only question is, other from the Litvische, other from the Chassidische, other from Vishnitz, other a Litvak, Kamoshe Kosov, a real Lithuanian or a real Vishnitzer. So he was telling me, although you have difficult questions, and I may not have answers for your questions, I want you to remember that you have roots, and don't detach yourself completely from the roots. And since I was older and I got the letter, I appreciated his message. Because the older you get, you sometimes come back to the most basic, primal truths about yourself, your own roots. He says, I finished the letter, he told me what he told me. He carefully takes the page, he puts it back in the book, he closes the book. And Reb Shlomo tells Rabbi Wolf, he says, I believe I was the only person whom he ever showed the letter, so it seemed to me. I don't know where the letter is today. I don't know if anybody has the letter, if anybody even knows about the letter, but I know that I saw the letter. And he says the professor passed away a very short time after that, returning his soul to its maker. Sometimes you meet a person who's so argumentative, who's so harsh. The Rebbe didn't get into arguments with him. He basically told him, I just want to remind you who you are. That's the deepest way to influence a person. Because I can teach you from today till tomorrow the most brilliant things in the world. But there's nothing like telling a person and showing them who you are, what your roots are, what's in your blood, what your DNA is made up of, who you really come from, and what you really represent. When Yosef HaTzadik is in the abyss with the wife of Potiphar, no calculations helped. The only thing that helped was he had to see who he is, who his father is. He had to see his own image from the perspective of his father. So ultimately, really, all of Teiras HaBaal Shem Tov, really all of Yiddishkeit, what does it come to tell a Jew? I don't want to make you into something. I don't want you to be a certain way. I'm just here to tell you who you really are. That's it. Remember that. All of Yiddishkeit is not telling you who you're supposed to be. It's telling you who you really are. If you could just if you could just dance a little bit and remove the psoilus, remove the toxicity, remove the negative energy, remove the layers, remove the shells. All I want to tell you is who you really are. Lech lecha. All I want is you should go to yourself. Lech lecha. You should go to yourself. So I want to bless us all that we should be able to profess that love to ourselves and to other people. To be able to love each of our children infinitely, to be able to love every Jew infinitely. And when we see somebody who's missing something, to be able to love them even more.